Marcus Wellington adjusted his Italian leather briefcase as he stepped out of his Tesla onto the perfectly manicured driveway of his $4.2 million estate in Westchester County. The tech mogul had built his fortune from nothing, clawing his way up from a one-bedroom apartment to owning 3 companies. But today, something would happen that would shake him to his core. As he approached his front door, he heard the sound of hammering coming from his backyard. What he discovered there would change everything he thought he knew about success, family, and what truly matters. This is a story that will make you question everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Wellington had always prided himself on being observant. It's how he'd built Wellington Digital Solutions from a garage startup into a $100 million empire before his 40th birthday. Every detail mattered in business, every angle calculated, every move strategic. But somehow, he'd completely missed what was happening in his own backyard. The hammering grew louder as he walked through his sprawling Tudor-style home. His wife Jennifer was at her yoga retreat in Vermont for the week, and their twin 8-year-old daughters, Emma and Sophia, were supposed to be with their nanny. Mrs. Rodriguez, the house felt unusually quiet, except for that persistent, rhythmic pounding echoing from somewhere beyond the French doors leading to their landscaped garden. Marcus loosened his silk tie and made his way through the kitchen, past the marble island where Jennifer usually left notes about the girls' activities. Today, there was nothing. The granite countertops gleamed under the pendant lights, spotless as always. Their housekeeper, Rosa Hernandez, maintained the 6,000-square-foot home with military precision. She'd been with the family for 3 years now, arriving every Tuesday and Friday at precisely 8 a.m. and leaving by 4 p.m. without fail. The hammering stopped abruptly as Marcus reached for the door handle. Through the glass, he could see movement near the massive oak tree that dominated their backyard landscape. The tree had been there when they'd bought the property 5 years ago, its thick trunk and sprawling branches providing natural shade over what Jennifer called their entertainment zone, complete with an outdoor kitchen, infinity pool, and carefully planned garden beds that cost more than most people's annual salary. Marcus stepped outside onto the flagstone patio, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the stone. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the perfectly trimmed lawn, and the automatic sprinkler system had left everything looking impossibly green and manicured. But what he saw near the oak tree stopped him dead in his tracks. Rosa Hernandez was balanced on a wooden ladder, wearing her usual simple jeans and a faded blue t-shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. But she wasn't cleaning. She was building something. Her hands moved with surprising skill as she secured a wooden board to what appeared to be the beginning framework of a structure nestled in the lower branches of the oak tree. "Rosa?" Marcus called out, confusion evident in his voice. She turned toward him, and for a moment he saw something flash across her face. Was it embarrassment? Fear? Her usual composed demeanor seemed to crack just slightly. "Mr. Wellington," she said, carefully climbing down from the ladder. "I didn't expect you home so early." Marcus walked closer, taking in the scene before him. Scattered around the base of the tree were pieces of lumber, a toolbox that had seen better days, and what appeared to be hand-drawn plans sketched on brown paper bags. The wood looked salvaged, not the pristine cedar or mahogany he would have ordered from his usual contractors, but weathered planks that showed character and age. "What exactly are you building?" he asked, his business-trained mind immediately shifting into analytical mode. Rosa wiped her hands on a small towel tucked into her belt. "A treehouse," she said simply. "For Emma and Sophia." Marcus felt his eyebrows rise. "A treehouse? Rosa, if the girls wanted a treehouse, Jennifer and I would have hired professionals. We have contractors who handle all our outdoor projects." "I know," Rosa replied quietly. "But they asked me." "They asked you?" Marcus couldn't hide his surprise. His daughters had never mentioned wanting a treehouse to him. They had everything: a swing set that cost $8,000, a playhouse that was essentially a miniature version of their own home, complete with electricity and running water, and access to every activity money could buy: private tennis lessons, equestrian training, art classes with instructors who'd trained at prestigious academies. Rosa nodded toward the house. "Last week, Emma told me about a book she read at school, about children who built a treehouse where they could have adventures and tell secrets. Sophia said she wished she had a place like that, somewhere that was just theirs." Marcus looked up at the partially constructed platform. It was rustic, nothing like the elaborate play structures he'd seen in architectural magazines. This looked handmade, personal, imperfect in a way that made it somehow more real than anything else in their carefully curated backyard. "So you decided to build them one," he said, still trying to process what he was seeing. "I asked if they'd mentioned it to you and Mrs. Wellington," Rosa continued, her accent giving her words a gentle cadence. "They said they had, but that you were both very busy with work and travel." Marcus felt a strange tightness in his chest. He couldn't remember Emma or Sophia mentioning a treehouse. But then again, when was the last time he'd had a real conversation with his daughters? Not the quick "how was school?" exchanges as he rushed out the door, or the distracted "that's nice, honey" responses while scrolling through emails on his phone. When had he last sat down and really listened to what his 8-year-old daughters were dreaming about? "The materials," Marcus said, gesturing toward the lumber. "Where did you get all this?" Rosa's cheeks colored slightly. "My brother Carlos works construction. He saved wood from renovation projects, pieces that were going to be thrown away but were still good. He helped me plan it out." She pointed to the sketches on the brown paper. "We measured everything carefully. It will be safe." Marcus picked up one of the paper bag plans. The drawing was surprisingly detailed, showing support beams, safety railings, and even a small roof. Notes were written in both Spanish and English, with measurements carefully marked in Rosa's neat handwriting. "How long have you been working on this?" he asked. 3 weeks, Rosa admitted. "I come early on Tuesdays and stay late on Fridays. And I worked some Saturdays when the family was out," Marcus calculated quickly. Rosa was paid well for her cleaning services, but he knew it wasn't a fortune. If she was putting in extra hours without compensation, using her own resources to buy materials, even salvaged ones, and coordinating with her brother's construction expertise, this represented a significant personal investment. "Rosa," he said slowly, "you do understand that you don't have to do this. Building tree houses isn't in your job description." She looked directly at him then, and Marcus saw something in her eyes he'd never noticed before. It wasn't defiance exactly, but a quiet strength that caught him off guard. "No," she agreed. "It's not in my job description. But Emma and Sophia are good girls. They deserve to have their dreams come true." The simplicity of her statement hit Marcus harder than any business presentation ever had. Here was a woman who cleaned his toilets and scrubbed his floors, who earned a fraction of what he made in a single day, and she was using her own time and money to build his daughters something they'd mentioned wanting, something he, their own father, hadn't even heard them ask for. Marcus looked again at the partially built treehouse, seeing it now through different eyes. The weathered wood wasn't cheap or inferior. It was full of character, telling stories of homes it had helped build and families it had sheltered. The imperfect joints and hand-sanded edges weren't signs of amateur craftsmanship. They were evidence of care, of someone taking time to do something meaningful rather than simply efficient. "Mr. Wellington?" Rosa's voice brought him back to the present. "Are you angry that I started this without permission? I can take it down if you'd prefer to hire professionals." Marcus turned to look at her, really look at her, for perhaps the first time in 3 years. Rosa Hernandez was probably in her early 40s, with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard work and practical skills. She sent money back to family in El Salvador, he remembered Jennifer mentioning once. She had her own children, grown now, who she'd raised while working multiple jobs, and she was spending her Saturdays building dreams for his daughters. "No," Marcus said finally. "Don't take it down." Rosa's shoulders visibly relaxed, though she maintained her respectful posture. "Thank you, Mr. Wellington. I promise it will be safe and beautiful when it's finished." Marcus walked closer to examine the construction more carefully. The foundation platform was solid, built with proper joists and cross-bracing that showed Rosa's brother knew his trade. The wood, while weathered, was structurally sound. He could see that much from his own experience with construction projects for his businesses. "How much more work is left?" he asked. Rosa pulled out another brown paper bag, this one covered with a timeline written in her careful handwriting. "The walls go up next, then the roof. Carlos said we need 2 more weekends, maybe 3 if the weather doesn't cooperate. And Emma and Sophia don't know about this?" "It's a surprise." Rosa smiled for the first time since he'd discovered her project. "They think I'm just doing extra garden work when I stay late." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, an uncomfortable realization creeping in. His daughters trusted Rosa enough to share their dreams with her. They felt comfortable expressing wishes to their housekeeper that they apparently hadn't shared with him. Or had they shared them, and he simply hadn't been paying attention? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The sound of a car door slamming interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Rodriguez's voice carried across the yard as she called out her usual afternoon greeting to the house. Marcus checked his watch. 3:15 p.m. The nanny always picked up Emma and Sophia from their after-school activities at this time. "I should get back to my regular work," Rosa said quietly. "Already moving to gather her tools. Wait." Marcus surprised himself with the urgency in his voice. "I want to help." Rosa stopped mid-motion, a hammer halfway to her toolbox. "Sir, with the treehouse, I want to help build it." The expression on Rosa's face was unreadable. She studied his face as if trying to determine whether he was serious or making some kind of joke she didn't understand. "Mr. Wellington, that's very kind, but you don't need to—" "When do you work on it next?" Marcus interrupted. "Saturday morning. Carlos comes at 7, and we work until about noon. I'll be here at 7. Rosa looked down at his expensive suit. His polished shoes, his soft hands that had never held anything rougher than a titanium laptop. "Do you know how to use tools?" It was a fair question. Marcus Wellington could negotiate million-dollar deals, code in 6 programming languages, and analyze market trends that would make economists weep. But he couldn't remember the last time he'd held a hammer with serious intent. "I can learn," he said. The back door slid open, and Emma and Sophia burst onto the patio, their school backpacks hitting the stone with twin thuds. They were identical twins, but with personalities as different as night and day. Emma was the planner, always organized and thoughtful, while Sophia was pure energy, approaching life with fearless enthusiasm. "Daddy!" Sophia launched herself at Marcus with her usual full-body hug. "You're home early." Emma approached more cautiously, studying the scene. Her sharp 8-year-old eyes took in Rosa's tools, the lumber scattered around the oak tree, and her father's unusual presence in the backyard during what should have been work hours. "What's all this stuff?" Emma asked, pointing toward the construction materials. Rosa and Marcus exchanged glances. Marcus realized he had about 3 seconds to decide whether to spoil Rosa's surprise or become complicit in it. "Rosa's working on a special project," he said carefully. "What kind of project?" Sophia had already broken away from the hug and was investigating the lumber pile with typical 8-year-old curiosity. "A surprise project," Rosa said, her voice carrying a gentle warning. "But little girls who ask too many questions might not get to see the surprise when it's finished." Both girls immediately clamped their mouths shut in exaggerated secrecy, though their eyes sparkled with excitement. "Is it a big surprise or a little surprise?" Emma asked. "Big," Marcus found himself saying. "Very big." Mrs. Rodriguez appeared on the patio, slightly out of breath. "Girls, inside for snack time and homework. You know the routine." As the girls gathered their backpacks and headed inside, Sophia turned back toward Marcus and Rosa. "Daddy, will you read to us tonight, like you used to when we were little?" The question hit Marcus with unexpected force. When they were little, they were still little. 8 years old was little. When had he started thinking of them as too old for bedtime stories? Of course, he said. Pick out whatever books you want. After the girls disappeared inside, Marcus and Rosa stood in awkward silence among the construction materials. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant lower, casting longer shadows across the yard. Mr. Wellington, Rosa said finally, you don't have to help with this project. I know you're very busy and— Rosa, Marcus interrupted her gently. Can I ask you something? She nodded. How did Emma and Sophia tell you about wanting a treehouse? I mean, what exactly did they say? Rosa set down the hammer she'd been holding and considered the question. Carefully, Emma said she read about children who had a secret place where they could talk about important things without grown-ups interrupting, with phone calls or work meetings. Sophia said she wished she had somewhere she could go when the house felt too big and too quiet. Each word landed like a small punch to Marcus's solar plexus. Too big and too quiet. Their house was 6,000 square feet of luxury, filled with every amenity money could buy. But his 8-year-old daughter thought it felt too big and too quiet. They said they wanted a place that was just theirs, Rosa continued. Not fancy like everything else, just theirs. Marcus looked up at the oak tree, trying to imagine it through his daughter's eyes. The tree was old and strong, its branches reaching out like protective arms. A tree house built in those branches wouldn't just be a play structure, it would be a sanctuary, a place where 2 little girls could whisper secrets and dream big dreams without the weight of their parents' expectations or the pressure of their overscheduled lives. What else do they talk to you about? Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he was ready for the answer. Rosa hesitated. Mr. Wellington, I don't want to overstep. Please, I need to know. Rosa picked up a piece of sandpaper and ran her thumb along its rough surface, gathering her thoughts. They worry about you, she said finally. Emma asked me once if all daddies work as much as you do. Sophia wanted to know if you still loved them, even though you're always on your phone during dinner. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. He thought about all the family dinners where he'd been present in body but absent in mind, scrolling through emails while his daughters chatted about their day. He'd justified it as multitasking, staying on top of business so he could provide for his family. But what he'd really been doing was missing their childhoods, one distracted dinner at a time. They love you very much, Rosa added quickly, perhaps seeing the pain in his expression. They brag about you at school. Tell everyone their daddy is important and smart. But they also wish you weren't so tired all the time. Marcus sat down heavily on the stone retaining wall that bordered Jennifer's rose garden. When had he become the kind of father his daughters had to wish would pay attention to them? When had he become so focused on providing for their future that he'd forgotten to be present for their childhood? Rosa, he said quietly, I want to ask you for a favor. Of course, Mr. Wellington. I want you to teach me how to build this treehouse. Not just help, really teach me. I want to understand how to use the tools, how to measure and cut and fit the pieces together. I want to build something with my own hands for my daughters. Rosa studied his face again, and Marcus saw something shift in her expression. The polite professional distance she usually maintained seemed to soften into something more genuine. It's hard work, she warned. Your hands will get dirty. You might get splinters. The wood is heavy, and the measuring has to be exact. I don't care about dirty hands, Marcus said. I want to do this. Carlos doesn't speak much English, Rosa continued. He's shy around people like you, people like me, rich people. Rosa said simply, without judgment. He's been working construction for 20 years, but he's still careful around clients who wear expensive watches. Marcus looked down at his Rolex, then back up at Rosa. Then I won't wear the watch on Saturday. For the first time since he'd known her, Rosa Hernandez smiled at him with genuine warmth, instead of polite professionalism. Okay, she said. Saturday at 7. Wear old clothes and bring work gloves if you have them. I don't have work gloves. Then we'll get you some. Carlos knows where to buy good ones that won't give you blisters. As Marcus walked back toward the house, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation that had nothing to do with quarterly earnings or market projections. He was going to build something with his hands, something for his daughters, something that mattered more than profit margins or competitor analysis. Behind him, Rosa continued gathering her tools as the shadows lengthened across the yard. The treehouse framework stood patient and waiting, ready to become whatever Emma and Sophia needed it to be. A castle, a fort, a secret headquarters, or simply a place where two little girls could remember what it felt like to be children. Marcus paused at the French doors and looked back one more time. Tomorrow, he would cancel his morning conference calls. Saturday, he would learn how to swing a hammer. And maybe, if he was lucky, he would also learn how to be the kind of father his daughters deserved. Marcus Wellington woke up at 5:30 a.m. on Saturday morning, 2 hours before his usual weekend alarm. He'd spent Friday evening at 3 different hardware stores, guided by a hastily scribbled list Rosa had given him. Work boots, safety glasses, leather gloves, and something called a chalk line that the teenager at Home Depot had to explain twice before Marcus understood its purpose. The clothes had been the real challenge. Marcus owned suits, golf attire, and casual wear that cost more per item than Rosa probably made in a week. But he didn't own anything designed to get dirty. He'd finally settled on an old pair of khakis he'd worn for a charity golf tournament and a Duke University t-shirt from his MBA program that Jennifer kept threatening to throw away. Now, standing in his kitchen at 6:45 a.m. with a cup of coffee that tasted different somehow, maybe because he was actually paying attention to it instead of drinking it while scanning emails, Marcus felt nervous in a way that had nothing to do with board meetings or investor presentations. The French doors revealed Rosa and a stocky man in his 50s already working near the oak tree. Carlos, he assumed. Rosa's brother moved with the efficient precision of someone who'd spent decades building things, measuring twice and cutting, once with movements that wasted no energy. Marcus grabbed his new work gloves and headed. Outside, "Good morning," he called out as he approached Rosa, turned and did a double take at his appearance. Without the expensive suit, and with his hair slightly messed from sleep, Marcus looked younger, more approachable. "Mr. Wellington, this is my brother Carlos," Rosa said in English, then switched to rapid Spanish. Carlos nodded politely, but kept his eyes on the lumber he was measuring. Marcus caught enough of Rosa's Spanish to understand she was explaining that the boss wanted to help with the project. "Buenos dias." "Carlos," Marcus said, exhausting about half of his Spanish vocabulary. Carlos looked up, surprised, and offered a shy smile. "Buenos dias, señor," Rosa translated as Carlos pointed to different stacks of materials, explaining the day's plan. They would frame the walls, cut windows, and begin installing the floorboards. Simple concepts, but Marcus quickly realized there was nothing simple about the execution. "First lesson," Rosa said, handing Marcus a measuring tape. "Carlos says everything starts with accurate measurements. One small mistake at the beginning becomes a big problem at the end." Marcus had heard similar philosophy in business, but holding the metal tape as Carlos showed him how to measure from multiple reference points felt completely different from theoretical knowledge. His expensive education hadn't covered how to account for the natural curve of a tree branch or how to adjust measurements when working with salvaged lumber that wasn't perfectly straight. "The wood has personality," Rosa translated as Carlos explained why certain boards went in specific positions. "You have to work with what it wants to be, not force it into something it's not." 20 minutes into the project, Marcus understood why Carlos had smiled at his appearance. The new khakis already had dirt stains, and his Duke t-shirt was damp with sweat. The work boots felt foreign on his feet, and his soft hands were already protesting the rough texture of the lumber despite the expensive gloves. But something unexpected was happening. For the first time in months, maybe years, Marcus's mind wasn't racing through multiple problems simultaneously. The simple act of holding a board steady while Carlos marked cutting lines required his complete attention. There was no room for thinking about quarterly projections or competitor analysis when you were trying not to let a 2x4 slip and ruin a careful measurement. "You're doing good," Rosa said, as Marcus successfully held his end of a wall frame while she and Carlos secured the joints. "Carlos says you have steady hands." The compliment meant more than Marcus expected. When was the last time someone had praised him for his physical abilities rather than his business acumen or financial success? The sound of giggles made all three adults look toward the house. Emma and Sophia were pressed against the kitchen window, still in their pajamas, watching the construction with obvious fascination. "They wake up early on weekends," Rosa explained. "Always excited for their Saturday adventures." "What kind of adventures?" Marcus asked, realizing he didn't actually know how his daughters spent their weekend mornings. "Different things. Sometimes we bake cookies, sometimes we work in the garden." Last Saturday, Sophia wanted to learn how to braid friendship bracelets, and Emma decided she needed to organize all the books in the playroom by color. Marcus felt another small pang of guilt. Rosa knew his daughter's weekend interests better than he did. While he was catching up on work emails or playing golf with clients, Rosa was the one witnessing Emma's organizational projects and Sophia's creative bursts. Carlos said something in Spanish, him pointing toward a stack of boards. "He wants to show you how to use the circular saw," Rosa translated. "But he says safety is the most important thing. More important than speed or making perfect cuts." The circular saw was intimidating, its blade gleaming in the morning sun. Marcus had used plenty of technology in his life, but this was different, immediate, physical, potentially dangerous if misused. Carlos demonstrated first, his movements confident and controlled. The saw bit through the wood with a satisfying buzz, leaving a clean cut that fit perfectly into the frame they'd been building. When he handed the saw to Marcus, his instructions were simple but firm. "Respect the tool, keep your hands clear, let the blade do the work." Marcus's first cut was wobbly and took twice as long as Carlos's demonstration, but the board fit into place, and Carlos nodded approval before moving on to the next piece. They worked for 2 hours in relative quiet, the language barrier bridged by pointing, gesturing, and the universal understanding that comes from working toward a shared goal. Marcus found himself falling into the rhythm of construction: measure, mark, cut, fit, secure. Each completed section felt like a small victory. Around 9 a.m., Mrs. Rodriguez appeared with Emma and Sophia, now dressed and fed. "Can we help?" Sophia asked immediately, her energy barely contained. Carlos looked uncertain, glancing between the power tools and the eager 8-year-olds. "There are safe jobs for helpers," Rosa said diplomatically. "You can sort screws and hand us tools." Emma immediately appointed herself tool manager, carefully arranging screws by size and type. Sophia took charge of cleanup duty, collecting wood scraps and keeping the work area organized. Marcus watched his daughters work alongside Rosa and Carlos, struck by how naturally they fell into the collaborative rhythm. Emma asked thoughtful questions about why certain joints were stronger than others. Sophia offered creative suggestions for design details that made Carlos smile despite the language barrier. "Daddy," Emma said during a water break, "how come you never built anything before?" The question was innocent, but it highlighted something Marcus had been avoiding thinking about. His own father had been handy, always fixing things around their modest house, teaching Marcus how to change oil in their car and repair loose fence boards. When had Marcus stopped using his hands for anything besides typing and signing documents? "I got busy with other things," Marcus said honestly. "But I'm learning now." "You're getting better," Sophia observed. "Your cuts are straighter than when you started," Carlos overheard and nodded vigorously, saying something in Spanish that made Rosa laugh. "He says you learn fast because you listen carefully and don't pretend to know things you don't know," Rosa translated. By 11 a.m., the treehouse had transformed from a simple platform into something recognizable. Walls were taking shape, with carefully planned openings that would become windows. The structure felt solid underfoot, and Marcus could finally envision what it would become. "Next Saturday, we will finish the walls and start the roof," Rosa explained as they cleaned up tools. "Carlos says after that it's detail work, sanding, painting, maybe building some furniture." Emma and Sophia had already begun planning the interior design, debating whether they wanted shelves for books or hooks for lanterns. Their excitement was infectious, and Marcus found himself making mental notes about their preferences. As Carlos loaded tools into his truck, he approached Marcus and spoke quietly in Spanish. Rosa translated, "He says you work hard for someone who doesn't need to work with his hands. He respects that." The simple statement carried weight. Carlos Hernandez made his living through physical labor, supporting his family by building and fixing things for people who could afford to hire others to do work they couldn't or wouldn't do themselves. His respect wasn't given lightly. "Tell him I respect his skill," Marcus replied, "and his patience with a beginner." After Carlos left, Marcus lingered in the backyard with Rosa, while the girls ran inside to show Mrs. Rodriguez their progress photos on Rosa's phone. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing what my daughters needed, for caring enough to do something about it, for letting me be part of building it." Rosa gathered the last of the scattered screws, considering her words carefully. "Mr. Wellington, can I tell you something?" "Please." "Emma and Sophia don't need a treehouse. They need time with their father. The treehouse is just an excuse for you to remember how to play with them." The observation was gentle, but penetrating. Rosa had orchestrated more than a construction project. She'd created an opportunity for Marcus to reconnect with his daughters through shared work toward a common goal. "You're very wise," Marcus said. "I'm a mother," Rosa replied simply. "I know what children need because I remember what mine needs. Time and attention. Everything else is just decoration." As Marcus walked back toward the house, his hands dirty and his back slightly sore from unaccustomed labor, he felt something he couldn't quite name. Satisfaction, maybe, or purpose. The treehouse was taking shape, but something else was being built too. A bridge back to the man he'd been before success had made him forget the simple pleasure of creating something with his own hands. Inside, Emma and Sophia were already planning next week's construction tasks, their voices bright with anticipation. For the first time in years, Marcus was looking forward to a Saturday that had nothing to do with golf or business meetings and everything to do with sawdust and small hands helping. "Hold board steady while Daddy learned how to build dreams." The week following, the first construction session passed differently for Marcus Wellington. Instead of his usual routine of back-to-back meetings and evening conference calls, he found himself leaving the office by 5 p.m. each day, something that hadn't happened in over 2 years. His assistant, Patricia, had initially assumed he was sick when he started blocking out time on his calendar, labeled simply family. Tuesday evening, Marcus discovered Emma in the living room with architectural books from his study, sketching elaborate treehouse designs with colored pencils. Her drawings included details like a rope ladder, built-in bookshelves, and what she called a thinking corner with cushions. "Rosa showed us pictures of tree houses on her phone," Emma explained when Marcus sat down beside her. "But I want ours to be special. Different from the ones everyone else has." Marcus studied his daughter's careful sketches, impressed by her attention to detail and spatial reasoning. "What makes a treehouse special?" he asked. Emma considered the question seriously, tapping her pencil against her lower lip. "It has to feel safe, but also like an adventure. And it needs places for secrets." "What kind of secrets?" "Important ones. Like when you're worried about something but don't want grown-ups to fix it for you right away. Sometimes you need to think about problems by yourself first." The comment struck Marcus as remarkably mature for an 8-year-old. What problems was Emma thinking about that she felt she couldn't share with him and Jennifer immediately? Wednesday brought a revelation during dinner. For the first time in months, Marcus put his phone in another room entirely. Without the constant ping of notifications, he actually heard Sophia describe her art teacher's demonstration of watercolor techniques and Emma's frustration with a classmate who kept borrowing her erasers without asking. "Daddy's really listening tonight," Sophia observed with 8-year-old directness. "I'm always listening," Marcus protested automatically. "No," Emma said gently. "Usually you're listening to your phone and us at the same time. Tonight you're just listening to us." The distinction hit Marcus like a cold splash of water. His daughters had been conducting their own careful analysis of his attention patterns, and their conclusion was damning in its simplicity. Thursday evening, Marcus made an unprecedented decision. Instead of reviewing quarterly reports, he spent an hour researching treehouse construction techniques online. He discovered that building elevated structures required understanding weight distribution, proper joint reinforcement, and weatherproofing techniques that were more complex than he'd initially realized. He also found himself looking at pictures of elaborate tree houses that cost tens of thousands of dollars, the kind he would have immediately ordered from a contractor just 2 weeks ago. But now, studying the photos, they looked sterile and impersonal compared to the rough-hewn structure taking shape in his backyard. Friday brought an unexpected visitor to Marcus's office. Jennifer called from Vermont to say she was extending her yoga retreat by another week. "I'm finding the meditation very centering," she explained over a connection that kept cutting out. "Martha says I should take advantage of this opportunity for personal growth." Marcus found himself more relieved than disappointed. Jennifer's absence meant he could focus entirely on the treehouse project without having to explain his sudden interest in manual labor or justify spending his weekends building something they could have purchased. "How are the girls managing without me?" Jennifer asked. Marcus almost said fine automatically, but caught himself. "Actually, we're working on a project together. They're really excited about it." "A project? What kind of project?" "A treehouse. Rosa suggested it, and I'm helping build it." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Marcus wondered if the call had dropped. "You're building a treehouse?" Jennifer's voice carried obvious disbelief. "Marcus, you don't build things. You hire people to build things." "I'm learning," Marcus said simply. "But why would you want to learn?" "We have contractors for that sort of work." It was a fair question, and Marcus realized he didn't have a clean answer. How could he explain that something about working with his hands alongside Rosa and Carlos felt more meaningful than any business deal he'd closed in the past year? "The girls want to be involved in building it themselves," he said finally. "It's more personal this way." "Well, just make sure it's safe," Jennifer said, "and maybe have a real contractor inspect it before they actually use it after hanging up." Marcus sat in his office looking out at the Seattle skyline, thinking about the difference between his and Jennifer's reactions to the treehouse project. She saw it as a task to be delegated. He was beginning to see it as something else entirely, an opportunity to create something meaningful with his daughters that couldn't be outsourced or purchased. Saturday morning arrived grey and drizzly, typical Pacific Northwest weather that Marcus would normally use as an excuse to stay indoors. But at 6:30 a.m., he was already dressed in his work clothes, now properly broken in and bearing honest stains from the previous weekend's labor. Rosa and Carlos were setting up a tarp when Marcus arrived in the backyard, clearly prepared to work despite the weather. "Good morning," Marcus called out, surprised by how genuinely happy he was to see them. "Mal tiempo," Carlos said, gesturing at the sky. "He says bad weather but workable weather," Rosa translated. "Construction doesn't stop for a little rain." Emma and Sophia appeared at the kitchen window right on schedule, pressing their faces against the glass. Marcus waved them outside. "Can we work in the rain?" Sophia asked, bouncing with excitement. "With the right gear you can work in almost any weather," Rosa said, producing 2 small rain jackets from her bag. "But safety first. No power tools when everything's wet." This meant the day would focus on detail work, sanding rough edges, fitting trim pieces, and planning the interior layout. Marcus discovered that hand sanding required a meditative attention to detail that was completely different from the immediate gratification of power tools. Feel the wood, Carlos instructed through Rosa's translation, guiding Marcus's hand along a board. The grain tells you which direction to sand. Working more slowly due to the weather constraints, Marcus found himself actually talking with Carlos instead of just following instructions. Rosa translated back and forth as Carlos shared stories about other projects. A deck built for a family with 6 children. A kitchen renovation that took twice as long as planned because the homeowners kept changing their minds. A small addition to his own house that he'd built one weekend at a time over an entire summer. He asks what you built before this, Rosa said. Marcus paused in his sanding. Nothing. This is my first building project. Carlos looked genuinely surprised when Rosa translated, then asked another question. He wants to know what you did with your hands before this, Rosa said. Typed, mostly. Signed papers. Shook hands in business meetings. Carlos considered this information seriously, then spoke at length in Spanish. He says that's not really using your hands, Rosa translated. He says hands are for creating things, solving problems, making something better than it was before. Business hands just move ideas around. The observation wasn't meant as criticism, but it highlighted something Marcus had been thinking about all week. His work involved manipulating abstract concepts, market share, profit margins, strategic positioning. But the treehouse was different. Every decision had immediate physical consequences. A poorly cut board wouldn't fit. A weak joint would fail. Bad planning would create problems that couldn't be solved with revised projections or strategic pivots. Emma, who had been quietly organizing screws by size, looked up from her work. Daddy, will you teach me how to sand? Marcus showed her how to hold the sandpaper, how to work with the grain instead of against it, how to feel for rough spots that needed extra attention. Emma approached the task with characteristic thoroughness, methodically working each board until it was perfectly smooth. Sophia, meanwhile, had appointed herself architectural consultant, offering suggestions for window placement and interior design that showed surprising spatial awareness. The windows should be different sizes, she announced. Big ones for looking out, small ones for letting in just a little bit of light when you want it cozy. Carlos nodded approvingly at her logic, measuring and marking window openings according to Sophia's specifications. Around noon, the rain intensified enough that they had to take shelter under the covered patio. Instead of calling it a day, Rosa produced a thermos of hot chocolate and sandwiches wrapped in aluminum foil. My mother always said that sharing food makes work go better, she explained as they sat on patio furniture. Looking out at their partially completed project, Emma and Sophia flanked Marcus on the outdoor sofa, still wearing their small work gloves, chattering about the morning's progress. For the first time in years, Marcus felt completely present in the moment, not thinking about what came next or what he should be doing instead. Rosa, Emma said during a lull in conversation, why did you decide to build us a treehouse? Rosa set down her cup of hot chocolate and considered the question carefully. Because you asked for something that wasn't about having more things, she said finally. You wanted a place to think and dream and be yourselves. That's different from wanting new toys or new clothes, but you could have just told us to ask Mommy and Daddy to buy one. Sophia pointed out, some things are more special when you build them yourself, Rosa replied. When you buy something, it belongs to you. When you build something, part of you belongs to it too. Marcus understood exactly what she meant. The treehouse taking shape in their backyard wasn't just a play structure. It was a physical representation of time spent together, problems solved collectively, and skills learned through patient teaching. No amount of money could purchase that kind of meaning. As the afternoon progressed and the rain tapered off, they returned to work with renewed energy. Marcus found himself looking forward to next Saturday with an anticipation that had nothing to do with completing the project and everything to do with spending another day working alongside his daughters. learning from Rosa and Carlos, and using his hands to create something that mattered. The treehouse was nearly finished, but Marcus was beginning to understand that the real construction project was something else entirely. The rebuilding of relationships that success and busy schedules had allowed to deteriorate. And that project would take much longer than a few weekends to complete. The third Saturday dawned clear and bright. The kind of perfect autumn morning that made the Pacific Northwest feel like the most beautiful place on earth. Marcus woke up before his alarm again, but this time it wasn't from excitement about the construction project. Today felt different, weighted with significance he couldn't quite name. The treehouse was nearly complete. One more day of work would see it finished. Roof sealed, windows fitted, interior details completed. Emma and Sophia would finally have their secret place, their adventure headquarters, their thinking corner among the branches. The project that had begun as Rosa's gift to his daughters would be complete, and then what? Marcus made coffee in the pre-dawn quiet of his kitchen, troubled by a question he hadn't anticipated. Once the treehouse was finished, would life simply return to normal? Would he go back to his 70-hour work weeks and distracted family dinners? Would Rosa return to being just the housekeeper who cleaned his toilets and scrubbed his floors? The thought made his chest tight with something like panic. By 7 a.m., the construction crew had assembled for the final time. Carlos arrived with a pickup truck loaded with roofing materials and what appeared to be a custom-built ladder. Rosa carried a large canvas bag that clinked mysteriously. When she set it down, Emma and Sophia bounded, outside in matching overalls that Jennifer had ordered online before leaving for Vermont, their construction uniforms, as Sophia had dubbed them. They'd been talking about nothing else all week, planning the treehouse's inauguration with the seriousness of event coordinators. "Today we finish," Carlos announced in careful English. The most he'd spoken directly to Marcus in 3 weeks. The final day's work required all the skills Marcus had learned over the previous weekends. Installing the roof meant precise measurements and careful attention to weatherproofing details. The windows, salvaged from Carlos's renovation projects and restored to perfect working condition, needed to be fitted exactly to prevent gaps that would let in rain or cold air. Marcus found himself working with confidence he wouldn't have possessed a month ago. His cuts were cleaner now, his measurements more accurate. Most importantly, he'd learned to trust the process, to work methodically through complex tasks without rushing toward completion. "You've become a real carpenter," Rosa observed as Marcus successfully installed a window frame without assistance. "I had good teachers," Marcus replied. Around mid-morning, Emma made an announcement that stopped all work. "We want to paint our names inside," she said. "All of us. Everyone who helped build it. It's traditional," Sophia added with 8-year-old authority, "like signing a cast when someone breaks their arm." Carlos looked puzzled until Rosa translated, then broke into the widest smile Marcus had seen from him. He said something rapid in Spanish that made Rosa laugh. He says in Mexico, when you finish building something important, everyone who worked on it leaves their mark. It's good luck, and it means the building will always remember who cared about it. Rosa opened her mysterious canvas bag to reveal paintbrushes and small containers of colorful paint. She'd come prepared for this ceremony, understanding something about completion and recognition that Marcus was only beginning to grasp. They painted their names on the interior walls of the treehouse in careful letters. Emma's precise script, Sophia's exuberant scrawl, Rosa's neat cursive, Carlos's bold print, and Marcus's own signature, the same one that appeared on million-dollar contracts, but somehow more meaningful here on rough wood, surrounded by sawdust and autumn light. As they worked, Rosa began telling the girls stories about other projects Carlos had completed, houses that sheltered families, decks where children took their first steps, kitchen renovations that brought families together around dinner tables. Each project carried stories, she explained, and those stories became part of what made structures into homes. "What story will our treehouse tell?" Emma asked. Rosa glanced at Marcus before answering. It will tell the story of a father who learned that the most important things can't be bought, only built, and of two little girls who taught him that love means paying attention. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. In her gentle, understated way, Rosa had identified exactly what had been happening over these 3 weeks. The treehouse had been a vehicle for something much more profound, a chance for him to remember what fatherhood actually meant. By early afternoon, the construction was complete. The treehouse stood finished among the oak's branches, sturdy and weatherproof, with windows that caught the afternoon light and a small door that opened with a satisfying creak. It looked nothing like the elaborate structures Marcus had seen in architectural magazines. It was better. It was theirs. Carlos packed his tools with the methodical care of someone ending a job well done. As he prepared to leave, he approached Marcus and spoke in halting English. "You, good student, patient, listen careful." He paused, searching for words. "Your daughters?" Very lucky. The compliment meant everything to Marcus. Over 3 weeks, he'd earned the respect of a master craftsman, not through his wealth or business success, but through his willingness to learn and his dedication to doing good work. After Carlos left, Marcus stood with Rosa and the girls, looking up at their completed project. Emma and Sophia were practically vibrating with excitement, ready to claim their new kingdom among the branches. "Can we go up now?" Sophia asked. "It's your treehouse," Marcus said. "You decide when it's ready." The girls scrambled up the custom ladder Carlos had built, their voices echoing from inside as they explored every corner, tested every window, and claimed their respective territories within the small space. Marcus and Rosa remained on the ground, listening to the sounds of pure joy filtering down through the branches. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly, "for all of it." "For building a treehouse?" Rosa asked. Though her eyes suggested she understood, he meant something deeper, for seeing what they needed, for caring enough to do something about it, for letting me be part of it, for teaching me. Marcus paused, struggling to articulate something he'd never had to put into words before. "For teaching me how to be present." Rosa was quiet for a long moment, watching Emma and Sophia arrange cushions in their new hideaway. "Mr. Wellington," she said finally, "can I tell you something personal?" Marcus nodded. "I have 3 children. They're grown now, all adults with families of their own. When they were small, I worked 3 jobs to support us. I cleaned offices at night, houses during the day, and worked weekends at a restaurant. I told myself I was doing it for them, to give them opportunities I never had." She paused, her eyes distant with memory. "I missed a lot of school plays, birthday parties, bedtime stories. I thought providing was the same as being present. I thought if I worked hard enough, it would make up for all the time I wasn't there." Marcus felt his throat tighten, recognizing his own story reflected in hers. "My youngest daughter, Maria, she's 32 now. Last month she told me about her favorite childhood memory. It wasn't any of the things I bought with all that extra work. It was a Sunday morning when I was too sick to work and had to stay home. We made pancakes together and built a fort out of couch cushions. She said it was the only time she remembered having my complete attention." Rosa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't want Emma and Sophia to have to wait 30 years to get their father's complete attention. That's why I built them a treehouse that required you to put down your phone and pick up a hammer." The revelation hit Marcus like a revelation and a rebuke simultaneously. Rosa hadn't just seen what his daughters needed. She'd engineered a solution that forced him to provide it. The treehouse had been as much about his education as theirs. "Rosa," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't know how to thank you for that kind of wisdom." "Don't thank me," Rosa replied. "Just remember it. And don't let the lessons end when the project is finished." From above, Sophia's voice called down, "Daddy, you have to come up and see the view from our windows." Marcus climbed the ladder Carlos had built, his work boots finding purchase on rungs, worn smooth by the craftsman's careful attention to detail. The treehouse interior was small but perfectly proportioned, with windows that framed different views of the yard and beyond. Emma had already claimed a corner for her books, while Sophia had designated the area near the largest window as the official dreaming spot. "What do you think, Daddy?" Emma asked, her face glowing with pride and excitement. Marcus looked around the small space, at the names painted on the walls, at the carefully fitted joints and smooth sand surfaces, at the windows that let in just the right amount of light, and felt overwhelmed by emotion he couldn't contain. "I think," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "it's the most beautiful thing I've ever built." "We built," Sophia corrected, "all of us together." As the afternoon sun slanted through the oak leaves, casting dancing shadows on the treehouse walls, Marcus sat in his daughter's secret place and understood something profound. Success wasn't about accumulating wealth or achieving market dominance. Success was about being present for the people you loved, about creating things together that money couldn't buy, about learning that the best gifts required time and attention rather than credit cards. Rosa had given his family more than a treehouse. She'd given them a blueprint for what really mattered. Later that evening, after Rosa had left and the girls were finally persuaded to come down for dinner, Marcus found himself making another unprecedented decision. He opened his laptop and began typing an email to his entire team. "Effective immediately, I will not be available for work-related communications between 5 p.m. Friday and 8 a.m. Monday. This policy will be strictly enforced and permanent," he paused. Then added, "I've learned that the most important construction projects happen outside the office and require our complete attention." As he sent the email, Marcus could see Emma and Sophia through the kitchen window, flashlights in hand, making their first nighttime expedition to their treehouse. Their voices carried through the evening air, planning adventures and sharing secrets in their sanctuary among the branches. The treehouse was finished, but Marcus understood now that his real education was just beginning. Rosa had taught him that love wasn't something you provided through wealth or success. It was something you built day by day, with patience and presence and the willingness to put down your phone and pick up your children's dreams. And for the first time in years, Marcus Wellington was excited about the work ahead. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.